Attention all you New Yorkers. Excuse me. Taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast. Breaking news.
And tonight on the Rita Cosby Show, President Trump addressing the nation. But guess what? A lot of networks did not cover it. I think that's disgusting. Can you imagine if they had done that to Joe Biden or Barack Obama? Why are they suppressing information from the President of the United States because they don't agree with him? Even if you don't agree with whatever he's saying, he is the President of the United States and he deserves to be heard. And I found it outrageous, as someone who's been covering presidents for a long time, to suddenly say, oh, I'm not going to cover him. It reminds me of what happened. Remember, I think it was CNN when the border was like being overrun and he started talking about the open border and CNN dumps out. And others essentially did the same thing at different moments, saying, well, that's not exactly true. We're going to dump out because that's a lie. Meantime, the border was open. We saw 20 million people coming through. So that was clearly, in my opinion, a very, very bad call by those networks. And tonight it was another very, very, very bad call and a very transparent call. Just to give you, before we get to the substance of the speech, and there's a lot of it, let's go a little bit of the play-by-plays of who covered it and who did not. The president announced that at 9 o'clock, there would be an address to the nation. He spoke for less than half an hour. That's not a lot of your time. It's not a lot of, quote, commercial time and all that. He doesn't do that many of these addresses to the nation. It's a pretty easy thing. You cover it. Whenever it's the president of the United States, there's nobody more important. You better cover it. You're in America, right? You're not in North Korea, right? And there, you better cover it or else, right? Can you imagine if Kim Jong-un said, I have a speech, and the network said, we're not covering it? But because we're in America, it is the leader of our country. Again, forget Republican, forget Democrat. You should be covering the president of the United States. And I think it's really disgraceful now that we're seeing all this information of the Democrats that are leading clearly a lot of these networks that decided, no, they're not going to cover it just because they don't like Trump. They're not going to cover it. And what we saw tonight, ABC television network did not cover it. NBC television network did not cover it. Not only did they not cover it, they actually put out a statement ahead of time saying they're not going to cover it. They were very proud that they weren't covering it. They were like telegraphing that they weren't going to cover it. Then MS Now, the cable channel, covered it just for a little bit, and then they dipped away because they obviously didn't like what they were hearing. Fox News covered it. Fox News Channel covered it. New York One in New York covered it. And CNN did not cover it, by the way. So ABC didn't cover it. NBC didn't cover it. CNN did not cover it. And MS Now only covered it for just a little bit. CBS covered it. It looked like just for a little bit as well. Not all of it. It looks like they came in late. But how dare ABC and NBC especially to come out and say, we're not going to cover the president of the United States. We don't think he's worthy of being covered is the message. That is preposterous. Now let's get to the content, guys, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on that. 1-800-848-9222, 1-800-848-9222. And you are listening to the Rita Cosby Show on a very busy news night. So the president came out and he says that he is declassifying, it should be right now on whitehouse.gov, information and documents which he says shows vulnerabilities in the U.S. elections, that there is new intel or intel that was buried and hidden, he says, by the deep state and others, and that wasn't even given to the president of the United States in briefings and elsewhere. And he says, we're declassifying it to show you what was told, what was not told to the president, what was not presented to Congress, what was intentionally suppressed, that there are individuals who came forward and said, some of them, that they did the suppression. So that's interesting. I'd be curious to talk to these people. I think the DOJ should be talking to them. Did they suppress information that would have been insightful into somebody potentially hacking? We're talking about like getting voter roll access. That's essentially what President Trump is saying the Chinese did tonight. One of the biggest revelations, I thought, and when it was interesting, when he came forward, and again, this is the allegation at this point. We haven't seen it. We can't prove it. But I'm just telling you what the President of the United States just said in his televised address on the few networks that covered it. Well, China came forward, they said, with going into the voter rolls. They never admitted it. What they say is that there's intelligence on the U.S. side showing that that's what they're doing, that China was essentially meddling in the election by getting access to voter rolls, and not just any small amount. 220 million, apparently, Americans had their information breached by the Chinese. That's a lot of Americans. And the information was like name, voter information, party, address, phone number. I mean, it's a lot of information. So how did that happen? I don't think I heard that I heard some allegations that China might be, remember, trying to have an influence. Remember back then during the election, there were reports about that. But to hear that maybe they went in and somehow got information to voters, that is troubling. How were they able to, quote, get into that sort of voting information? Of course, the next question is, did they do anything about it? Was there any information whatsoever tied to this that shows that they took advantage of it and actually did something with it? I'd be curious about that. Or did they just get the information and didn't necessarily do anything beyond that? But here's President Trump talking about what he says this new intel shows about China. Take a listen.
China and other countries have been trying to meddle in our elections. Evidence of fraud has been buried. Hundreds of thousands of non-citizens and dead people are listed and active on the voter rolls. And yet we still have elections with no voter ID, no proof of citizenship, and tens of millions of ballots floating aimlessly through the mail.
And here is a little bit more of what he says was China's role. Take a listen.
The cover-up of this colossal security breach is even more disturbing in light of the additional information showing that China engaged in other election-related activities to undermine my first administration and our 2020 campaign. They did not want, and they just didn't want it. They fought like hell not to have it, Donald Trump, to win, and for good reason. As the documents we are releasing show, CIA reporting explicitly stated, and I quote, in mid-2018, the Chinese Communist Party's policy was to leverage all domestic and foreign elements that were opposed to the U.S. president in an effort to reduce the U.S. president's votes and make him resign or prevent his reelection.
I mean, if they actually did go through some of these steps to have an influence, that's a pretty big deal. And here's a little bit more, because you heard him talk initially about the voter rolls. And he says as they went through so far, and this is just a small amount, he says because a lot of the states won't hand over their voter rolls. Mostly Democratic run states don't want to hand over their voter rolls. I wonder why. But he says already they found a huge number of people that never should have been listed to vote, hundreds of thousands.
Finally, to reveal just how vulnerable our elections continue to be, we are releasing the results of a stunning investigation by the Department of Homeland Security. According to the DHS review of state voter rolls and public records, they identified approximately 278,000 non-citizens who are registered to vote in federal elections. Since Democrat states refuse to share their voter files, the real number is actually much higher than that. Yet, even this limited analysis found more than 250,000 foreigners illegally registered to vote.
So close to 300,000 foreigners registered to vote. And he says that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's probably is just the tip of the iceberg. It's funny. We've had on Katz and Cosby, we have talked to people like Tom Fenton of Judicial Watch. And he claimed that there's many, many hundreds of thousands in just some states when they have done their own searches of voter rolls. So we'll see where this goes. It sounds like it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it's interesting. And it's interesting to see what it's trying to do with this information. China, I'm sure, will deny it. Even if it's true, they'll deny it. But could they get into our voter rolls? And does that open just a lot of questions? I think most importantly, we all should make sure that our elections are free and fair. Nobody should have a problem with that. Everybody should have faith in the election process. And then President Trump started his speech tonight, you guys, touting the success also of America. And it was interesting because he talked about the border. He talked about the economy. He said essentially America is on fire, that it's doing great. And he touted a whole bunch of success. That's the way he started out the speech. Take a listen.
Good evening. Before we begin, I'm proud to report that our country is safer, stronger, and far wealthier than it has ever been before. We are doing great. Less than 2 years ago, we inherited an economic and social disaster. After the worst inflation in 48 years, the wide open borders with millions and millions of people pouring in from all over the world, including criminals of all types, and 11,888 murders, many of whom killed more than one person. We had transgender for everybody, men and women sports, crime ravaging our cities, and the whole world was laughing at us as a nation, but not anymore. 2 years ago, our country was dead. Now we are the hottest country anywhere in the world.
We are the hottest country anywhere in the world, and touting a lot of big successes. And then he said, because of all this, we got to make sure we feel good about the election process. At the end, he talked about free and fair elections. He also talked about the SAVE Act. That is the Voter ID Act. And he said, why would you not want to have voter ID? I 100% agree with him on that. Why would you not want to have voter ID? Why would anybody oppose saying they want to have pictures? Why would anybody say, no, that's overreach? They even call it, the Democrats, the Voter Suppression Act. Why is it suppression to have voter ID so people feel good when you go to the polls, that it's the right person voting? Why would you not want to just double check, triple check? You want to open it up to fraud or somebody, just even for people to feel that way? Why would you? If you don't give assurances, how can they feel safe? And yet the Democrats keep calling it, as I said, the Voter Suppression Act. They say it's racist. They say it's totally improper and that it's unfair to ask for ID. So what? You're supposed to say, everybody just come on in and vote. I don't understand why the Democrats have a problem with the Voter ID Act, the Save America Act. And take a listen. Here is Senator Chuck Schumer. Of course, he is the Senate Minority Leader. And even before the speech happened, he could not wait to bash it. Take a listen.
With respect to the president's speech, CBS News is reporting that this may include some previously unreported claims about Chinese meddling in U.S. elections. Is that something you've ever been briefed on, or do you believe that might have any merit?
No one has any faith that Trump is going to tell the truth. He's lied for 6 years. He's particularly lied about the elections in 2020. No one is going to have any faith in what he says and does. And as long as he keeps appointing sycophants to the agencies in charge of the intelligence, no one has any faith or trust in what he's going to say.
Is there anything the president...
No one has any trust in what he has to say. No matter what he's going to talk about, no matter what it is, we don't believe him. You shouldn't carry it. And in fact, AOC was the orchestrator. AOC, who I believe is going to be running for president in 2028. She's the one who said, networks, you shouldn't be carrying this. I guess she's the new boss of ABC Television Network and the new boss of NBC Television Network because they listen to her. And maybe partly the boss of some of these others who dumped out early, dumped out after a minute or two. Can you imagine if Obama started talking and then other networks dumped out? You would never hear the end of it. They'd call you racist. I mean, this is so disgusting. That to me is shameful, whether you like it or agree with it or whatever. And I say this as somebody who's covered the White House. I've been in the White House many times, you guys, covering many presidents. I always give the respect to the president. You always want to hear what he has to say, even if you don't agree with him. How dare a network say, no, we don't like him, whether they say it overtly or not. But if you don't air him, that's essentially saying he is suppressed. We don't care what he says. We don't care what he's doing. We don't care whatever he says. And then you have the Democrats undermining him. This is really disgusting. This is like the Soviet Union.